The New York Times is criticized from all sides, mentioned in its anonymous source-based article claiming Russia paid bounties in Afghanistan to kill American troops. And the stories that shaped the week here on RT International. After a delay due to COVID-19, Moscow finally holds its World War II victory parade, marking the 75th anniversary of the defeat of Nazi Germany. Russia begins voting on constitution reforms, with 2 regions making people cast their ballots online only due to coronavirus concerns. Broadcasting live direct from our studios in Moscow, recapping the week's top stories with our weekly program. This is RT International. And the New York Times is facing widespread criticism after it published an article saying Russia offered bounties in Afghanistan to kill U.S. troops. It also claimed Donald Trump was briefed on the matter. However, the director of national intelligence denies that either the president or the vice president were ever briefed on this, and Trump himself labeled the piece fake news.
The fake news New York Times must reveal its anonymous source. Bet they can't do it. This person probably does not even exist.
The article has been slammed by the Russian Foreign Ministry, which called the piece deliberate disinformation. Saturday also saw the Taliban denying the New York Times article. RT's Igor Zhdanov comments now on the piece in question and asks who might benefit from its publication.
It's time to blow off the dust that settled on any smear tactics guidebooks since the last U.S. election. But as Democrats are looking to wash away the humiliation of 2016 by trying to bring down Trump this time, they are resorting to the same old narrative that failed them in the first place, Russiagate.
American intelligence officials have concluded that the Russian military intelligence unit secretly offered bounties to Taliban-linked militants for killing coalition forces in Afghanistan.
The piece rests on the familiar pillars of Pulitzer-winning journalism. Anonymous sources that believed, concluded, and assessed. The claims are said to be based on interrogations of captured Afghan militants. At least in part, the article says. Well, because less than in part, well, would be nothing at all, really. The alleged culprit is the same Russian intelligence unit that is accused of the Salisbury poisoning.
Western intelligence officials say the unit, which has operated for more than a decade, has been charged by the Kremlin with carrying out a campaign to destabilize the West through subversion, sabotage, and assassination.
Sabotage the West by bribing the Taliban into something they are doing anyway. Comic book villains have more logic and motivation than Russia in this article. But as evil and sleazy as Russia may be portrayed in this story, it's still just collateral damage and not the actual target.
President Trump gets briefed in March that Russia is paying bounty money for dead American soldiers right now. And his response to that is nothing.
His entire presidency has been a gift to Putin, but this is beyond the pale. It's a betrayal of the most sacred duty we bear as a nation, to protect and equip our troops when we send them into harm's way.
If Trump refuses to hold Putin accountable for funding terrorism against U.S. troops in Afghanistan, then Congress must again step up.
I expect the Trump administration to take such allegations seriously and inform Congress immediately as to the reliability of these news reports.
The story is taking jabs at Trump amid reports he's about to take another step towards ending the catastrophic 2 decades-long invasion. Russia's foreign ministry has dismissed the allegations as fake, pointing out that Moscow has all along been trying to mediate the conflict and have the United States and the Taliban, in fact, sign a peace deal.
The simple disinformation clearly illustrates the low intellectual abilities of propagandists among American intelligence, who have to come up with such nonsense instead of inventing something more reliable. However, what else can we expect from intelligence which miserably failed in the 20-year war in Afghanistan?
It's Russia collusion 2.0, as if that has ever been worth anything more but a House impeachment that left Trump unfazed. But hey, maybe at least Robert Mueller will have a second shot around 2021.
We heard from Max Abrams, a fellow at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft in the U.S., who says anonymous intelligence data is always questionable.
When I first read this story in the New York Times, I pointed out on Twitter that it was weakly sourced. And then a number of people replied and they said, yeah, but it's been corroborated by, the Wall Street Journal, etc., CNN. And so the more mainstream media piles up on a story like this, the more it takes on the impression of being true. But again, we can't really know that without knowing more about this intel. How is the intel generated? Who is providing this intel? And is it pure or is it largely partisan driven? The intel agencies have been largely anti-Trump. And so it's not hard for mainstream media to get in touch with sort of another anonymous intel person to verify the veracity of these stories, even if they're not necessarily true, or even if we're hearing only, a partial truth about it. It's certainly trying to be spun in a way that implicates Trump in the worst manner to help push Biden across the finish line.
After being delayed by the global pandemic, Moscow finally held its military parade on Wednesday, marking the 75th anniversary of victory over Nazi Germany. Now, Red Square echoed to the sound of thousands of marching feet from those tasked with protecting the motherland, and hot on their heels, quite literally, was a procession of military vehicles and equipment before the whole thing was topped off with a spectacular flyby. Our correspondent Saskia Taylor was down on Red Square and summed up the emotions of the day for us.
For me, actually, the most moving part of the day is after the president has spoken and they say in unison, "Ura, ura, ura." And that's because I hear history in that sound. There are echoes of those people 75 years ago on Red Square. Victory was celebrated, but more importantly, so were the people who had fought tooth and nail to bring it about. My grandmother fought. She actually fought in the Emilia Plata's Independent Women's Battalion, and it was an all-female unit that was part of the 1st Polish Army, and that was part of the Soviet forces. And actually, they fought at a battle in Lenino, which is in Belarusia, and they actually managed to break through the German defenses, take back and hold part a strategic area of the bridge that proved to be crucial in another battle later on. I could go up to any single person on the street and ask them, what did your relatives do during the war? Each would give me a detailed family story. Someone who fought and died at Stalingrad, someone who survived the blockade of Leningrad, someone who fought with the partisans, and someone who, on the 24th of June 1945, walked onto that very square right behind me.
Traditionally, the event is held on May the 9th, but the coronavirus prevented it this year, so Wednesday was chosen for the Jubilee instead. And it was not just a random date. Back in 1945, the first ever victory parade was held on June 24th, when many Soviet soldiers had made it back from the front lines and could share the celebrations with the whole country.
In commemoration of victory over Germany and the Great Patriotic War, for June 24th, 1945, I am scheduling a parade of the active army, the Navy and Moscow garrison, the Victory Parade in Moscow's Red Square.
was a long-anticipated and unforgettable day. Soviet people strongly believed it would come.
Looking at the pile of wet, dirty cloths and thinking that the long-expected victory had come, and we, the warriors, had helped our people to free the motherland, to bring back peace, and that was my contribution as a soldier.
Riding around and greeting the troops, I could see rain trickling from their caps, but their spirits were too high to even notice.
It was a gloomy Sunday. Red Square's cobblestones were wet. The bunches of flowers that we got after the parade were wet. But years on, my heart doesn't believe in those memories. The 24th of June 1945 has become a part of my life. It was the most cheerful and sunny day.
After months of lockdown, people around the world have been enjoying their first taste of freedom in recent weeks, following the easing of many coronavirus restrictions. But for those thinking the fight against the virus has been won, the World Health Organization, well, they have a warning for you. It's only just begun.
Globally, the pandemic is still accelerating. It took more than 3 months for the first 1 million cases to be reported. The last 1 million cases were reported in just 8 days.
Among those who have already felt the second wave is China. A recent outbreak was traced to a local wholesale food market, which supplies more than 80% of agricultural products to the capital, Beijing. The government acted quickly, shutting it down and firing up its testing program. It was planned to test an entire area in just 3 days. That's more than 60,000 people. We asked locals how the process went.
I thought it would be fast to take such a test, but in fact I spent 3 hours queuing up for the test. But when I saw the doctors, my heart sank because their protective goggles were all fogged and their sweat was running all down their faces.
Meanwhile, in Germany, new cases of the coronavirus have continued popping up in various regions, leading local authorities to impose countermeasures, which have differed from city to city. After outbreaks at meat processing plants, the German food and agricultural minister has called for price increases to help create a safer working environment. RT's Peter Oliver reports.
Dealing with coronavirus here in Germany has moved away from sweeping national measures, with restrictions being lifted or imposed based on regional factors. Here in Berlin, authorities have lifted restrictions that had limited get-togethers to a maximum of 5 people from 2 different households. Earlier, the same move had been made in the states of Brandenburg and Thuringia. It's a very different picture in North Rhine-Westphalia. An outbreak centred around a meatpacking plant in the city of Gütersloh has seen over 1,500 people test positive, and a strict lockdown until the end of the month has been imposed on the area.
We will order a lockdown for the whole district of Gütersloh. The purpose is to calm the situation, to expand testing to establish whether or not the virus has spread beyond the employees of Tonies. we will get a better picture of the situation through intensive testing, and can then see more clearly within 7 days what the situation is. We want to bring about this lockdown, which will stay in place until June 30th, and bring us more clarity.
Long queues have formed as tests have been made available to everyone in the affected regions. The military have been drafted in to help with the large-scale testing operation. Health professionals suggest that a large number of symptomless COVID carriers are behind this spike, the largest localized outbreak in Germany.
That is already the idea of these tests, because we know that there are symptomless people who don't have a high fever, who carry the virus and then unfortunately spread it. Today we've counted around 400 to 600 people waiting, and we will also be setting up a hotline in the next few days to help with the registration.
Locals queuing for tests aren't at all happy with the slaughterhouse at the centre of this spike, or the state authorities, who they say should have done more.
But I want to be careful and take a test. I don't have symptoms and what should I say? I'm a bit angry with the slaughterhouse, that they didn't react sooner. And now our region is headed into another lockdown. We have to go through it.
Definitely the politicians and the authorities should have reacted earlier. And I'm completely convinced that the first count of those infected were faked. And they're not taking any responsibility.
Away from North Rhine-Westphalia, there's also a localized lockdown in the city of Magdeburg, where workers and volunteers have been seen bringing water and supplies to some of the 800 or so families who have been told to quarantine there. Around 700 people remain in an apartment complex in Göttingen, a forced quarantine which turned violent last weekend. And remember, I said restrictions were being lifted in Berlin. Well, not for all Berliners. In the Friedrichshain area of the German capital, almost 40 households have been put on lockdown. Those living nearby are concerned about the risk posed and not too happy with those who flaunted social distancing to party in the summer sun.
I have a feeling of fear.
Can you explain why?
Because I belong to the risk group and I have medical preconditions. We are doing this for weeks and months. We don't do visits anymore. Mostly we sit on the balcony, apart from grocery shopping or a walk, pharmacy or the doctor. That's it.
We don't understand why some have parties in the parks and in the compounds. We don't understand this.
Off the back of those regional COVID-19 spikes, authorities here in Berlin have said that they will be enforcing fines against those not wearing face coverings on public transport or in shops. As we try and get back to as normal a life as possible, while still remembering that coronavirus is as infectious today as it was a few months ago. Peter Oliver, RT, Berlin.
A week of voting is underway in Russia on amendments to the country's constitution. We will have details on that and much more after a short break. This is RT International and The Weekly.
Join me every Thursday on The Alex Salmond Show, when I'll be speaking to guests on the world of politics, sport, business and show business. I'll see you then.
Is your media a reflection of reality? In a world transformed, what will make you feel safer? Isolation or community? Are you going the right way or are you being led somewhere? Which direction? What is truth? What is fake? In a world corrupted, you need to descend. So join us in the depths, or remain in the shallows.
Welcome back to The Weekly right here on RT International. Now, the voting process to reform the Russian constitution began on Thursday. Polls are open nationwide until the 1st of July. Now, the vote had been originally planned for April 22nd, but was delayed by the coronavirus pandemic. And to alleviate concerns about crowds, polling stations are open for an entire week instead of just a single day. There are about 200 proposed amendments to the Constitution. One of the changes would allow Vladimir Putin to run for president for another 2 terms. Critics have argued over the all-or-nothing approach to the vote, where people have to say yes or no to the entire package and can't just pick and choose which amendments they want. Putin supported the changes in a speech in the State Duma back in early March.
It was January when President Putin stunned Russia by proposing changes to the country's foundation law, the Constitution. Within hours, the entire government had resigned. The current constitution dates back to 1993, to Western-backed President Boris Yeltsin. Built from the debris of the communist Soviet era, Yeltsin's constitution created what would be criticized as a hyper-presidential system. The president called all the shots. And it was forged in bloodshed. As a hostile communist-controlled parliament tried to impeach Yeltsin, he resorted to the military to keep in power. 187 people were killed that autumn. One of the most important proposals today is to end that hyper-presidential system, while keeping the fundamentals of the Constitution intact. So what powers does the President currently have? Only he alone can nominate the Prime Minister and other cabinet members. Parliament just gives a formal green light to the candidate. The proposal would flip that, giving Parliament the final say on who serves in government, and the President would not be able to reject the MP's choices. Powers would be redistributed between various branches of government, intended to lock in more checks and balances into Russia's government system. Another big change would limit the president's tenure to only 2 terms in total, as opposed to no more than 2 terms in a row as it is now. That means future leaders won't be able to serve for as long as Putin has. But it's that amendment which has got Western media excited, Putin's perceived trick to stay in power forever. The existing rules say Putin must stand aside in 4 years' time after his 2nd consecutive term, albeit his 4th mandate in total. MPs are pushing a proposal to zero out his term count, a reset button for an updated constitution.
I propose to add to the new constitution that the current president, like any other citizen, would have the right to be elected to the post of head of the state.
That would mean Putin could run again in 2024 and in 2030 if he wants to. Rewind back to January and why Putin said he wanted to change the constitution. He says it's to develop a welfare state.
The reason for these amendments is to ensure the further development of Russia as a state governed by the rule of law, to increase the efficiency of institutions in our country.
With that in mind, there are more than 140 amendments. One guarantees that the minimum wage will not be lower than the cost of living. Another secures an annual adjustment to improve the real value of pensions and allowances. There would also be tougher requirements for civil servants, such as banning key officials from having foreign citizenship or foreign bank accounts. There would also be a ban on giving away any Russian territory and a priority to domestic law over international. There are some controversial proposals too. Marriage would be classified solely as a union between a man and a woman, and God gets mentioned, although the Constitution will still say Russia is officially a secular state. It's an all-or-nothing vote. Russians won't be able to pick and choose which of the amendments they want to see. It's simply a yes or a no to the whole package. And the changes will only be enacted if the Russian people give it an unequivocal mandate.
If people do not vote for the amendments, they will not be added to the Constitution.
Online voting is being held for the first time in Russia. 2 regions are holding their votes electronically. It is another measure to help quell COVID fears. The online platform being used promises data encryption and privacy guarantees, and registration for online voting closed last week. Now, while the reforms are proving controversial, some commentators claim that they are necessary for Russian society.
I think it's very important to note that the present constitution came out of violence, came out of a time of deep uncertainty, a time of very tumultuous events after the collapse of the Soviet system. Here we are, 27 years later, and this document has centralized power dramatically, and Putin feels it needs to be changed. Opinion polls suggest the majority of Russians feel it should be changed as well. While the Western media is focusing on the Putin term limits thing, which, by the way, does mean he has to go eventually one day anyway, Putin says he will respect the vote. I mean, technically, by the way, he didn't have to have this national vote at all. I mean, it was passed by every Russian region. All 85 federal subjects passed it. The state parliament, the Duma, passed it, the national parliament. He didn't have to have this vote. He's chosen to do it because he obviously wants public democratic legitimacy. In fairness, I think if there had been that many ballot papers, it would have been a hell of a lot more confusing than a single ballot paper saying yes or no.
Many Italian businesses are facing the heartbreaking decision of whether to cut their losses and close their doors for good. The 3-month coronavirus lockdown has cast a devastating blow to small and medium enterprises in the country, and in particular, the hospitality sector. Italy has been one of the hardest hit by COVID-19, and this year's financial losses could amount to 170 billion euros. Many thousands of companies are at risk, and considering closure, it's estimated that this could all leave up to about 1 million people out of work.
70 days of closure killed us, caused us more than 150,000 euros of damage. And today, due to COVID-19, we will find ourselves opening only 2 of the 3 stores we have.
The current situation is sad. This restaurant began in 1910 thanks to my father. I have been managing it for 58 years, and I can tell you that I have never really seen such a desperate moment.
It is unthinkable that human beings can experience all this. I believe that it is basically a punishment from heaven. Perhaps we have always thought of being masters of the earth, but instead we are nothing but grains of sand.
The coronavirus and the consequent lockdown have created many problems for us. We've lost 3 months of revenue, and if we remain closed throughout the summer, we would lose even more money. Unfortunately, the choice is inevitable. I spoke to my brother, and after 59 years, we've decided to close the family restaurant.
In response, the Italian government has offered lifelines to businesses, although there are complaints these measures have had little effect, while many say they have received no financial help whatsoever. Companies continue to suffer losses as they are still expected to uphold their social obligations to employees and pay taxes, all while being forced to remain closed.
Certainly something more could be done. The state made us close and did not understand that we needed immediate help. Other companies that have requested money from the state have received absolutely nothing.
Many reservations have been cancelled. I'm thinking of closing everything because I have many employees, and if I don't, I risk getting into a lot of debt. If things go wrong for 2 months, you risk failing, so it's a very bad situation.
The bills came in anyway. They didn't stop them. My employees have applied for subsidies, but I don't know if they've received them yet. We too have not received anything for 3 months. This was our only job. For 3 months we've been continuing with the money we had, but I cannot continue because we would risk going into more debt.
Just under 32 minutes, I'll be back with another look of your weekly. This is RT International. Glad to have you with us.
There's so much going on in the world, don't you think? When's the last time you had a real bird's eye view of things? Shouldn't the news be more than just hours of bickering? Give me 30 minutes, and I'll take you across the globe.
"54 jets and more than 1,300 military personnel are headed to Eielson Air Force Base in Alaska." Where is that, you say? Come on, I'll show you. What's the reason for any type of enhanced U.S. military presence in this area? Russia! What is it suddenly about the South China Sea that makes it so coveted? 11 billion barrels of oil. Take a look at this map. Who really owns what? China says, no, it belongs to us. India says, no, we claim that. That belongs to us. Both of these countries have nuclear weapons capabilities. There is reason for concern. So that's why we're going to drill down on this story for you today, right here. on the News with Rick Sanchez, where, you know, as we always like to say, we do believe, by golly, it's time to do news again.
I turn on the TV, learn about the world and what's happening around me. I see shills on the screen spitting lies every day because of fake news narratives is how they stay paid. Seeing too many goons who are building up prisons with bomb after bomb, brick by brick globalism, making mile-high money off that endless war. But I found a network that'll question more. Science breakthroughs, outer space, civil strife, climate change, cyber warfare, coups, and violence. All that mainstream wants to do is keep us quiet. Watch the riots, can't keep us silenced. Critical voices, bold perspective. Question more is our directive. We don't take sides, we walk the walk. RT America means real talk.